All right. Namaste and good evening, and thank you for being here. I'm Sandy Graham, CEO of VASA Publishing and the publisher of The Gita Comes Alive. Tonight, we have the author of The Gita Comes Alive, Jeffrey Armstrong, who was recently awarded the Distinguished Indologist Award by the ICCR, which is the Indian Council for Cultural Relations. Tonight, we have a special guest, Nilesh Oak. Nilkanth Oak, not to be confused with other Nilesh Oaks out there, is the author of several controversial books, but in particular, he wrote When Did the Mahabharata War Happen?, where he freshly evaluated astronomical observations of the Mahabharata text. His work led to the validation of the 5,561 BCE as the year of the Mahabharata War, while falsifying more than 120 alternative claims. We asked Nilesh Ji to write the foreword to the Bhagavad Gita Comes Alive as an endorsement for his work, and it is one of the main reasons, or one of the reasons, that we call this, the Bhagavad Gita Comes Alive, a radical translation. When someone's research goes beyond the norm, they can expect criticism from their peers. And both Jeffrey and Nilesh, Jeffrey for the decolonized version, are definitely in this category. We are fortunate enough to have both of them with us tonight. So welcome to both of you. Namaste. And tonight, I'm going to ask Jeffrey to begin with where we left off. We're just at the beginning of chapter 18, and I believe this is episode 26 of season 3. So welcome, Jeffrey. I'll turn it over to you. Namaste.
Pranam Sandhuji and Namaste, and thank you so much. And we're so fortunate to have Nilesh with us today. Sadhu, sadhu. I'm so looking forward to us doing many wonderful things together, and this just one more in that long list that I imagine. And before we begin, I always like to start out honoring the rishis and gurus and acharyas that came before us. So Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshvara, Guru Sakshat Parabrahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha, Om Argana Timirandasya, Ganan Gana Salakaya, Chakshur Unmilitam Gena, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. And my own dear Vedanta Guru, Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Praskatya Desatarine, and to all the rishis and sadhus and gurus and unspoken acharyas and persons who've carried this amazing and life-altering Vedic Vidya forward through time for thousands and thousands of years, dedicating their lives to it, giving their all, and holding the torch of that Vidya for the lifetime that they lived. And all of them have made it possible for us to receive it in such a pristine form. As you may remember, we were making our way through the Bhagavad Gita, and we ended up at the finish of chapter 17. And since it leads us with little fanfare into chapter 18, I'm going to back up and start at verse 618 in chapter 17. So that's chapter 17, verse 23, so that we can just find our way and our momentum. As I was translating the Bhagavad Gita, I thought of it as a trail through a beautiful forest, but often overgrown and difficult to go all the way through the forest. And so I thought, what would make it possible to start at one end of the Bhagavad Gita and go all the way through to the other side without any interruptions, without being sidetracked, without getting distracted. So I took the commentary out, reserving it for other places like tonight. And in the book itself, there was no commentary. It was Arjuna and Sri Krishna having a conversation. And so that's how we presented it. And because we're presenting it to the English-speaking world, then it was necessary to remove all of the inappropriate colonizing English and then to add the necessary Sanskrit words that do not have synonyms in English so that we could expound upon various concepts that don't exist in English, that don't exist in European languages. And this is the unique feature of Sanskrit, of Sanskritam. So as we begin, we're at verse 618, chapter 17, verse 23, just to regain our momentum. And I just want to remind you also of one thing. It is in this chapter that in verse 28, the last of the chapter, the word hutam occurs. And you may remember that 4 places in the Bhagavad Gita, this ubiquitous, interesting Sanskrit word, hutam, H-U-T-A-M, it occurred in chapter 4, verse 24, chapter 9, verse 16, chapter 11, verse 19, and then again in a few moments in chapter 17, verse 28. Hutam is the poster child for garbled Sanskrit making its way into English. It came in through German, as many words did, and in German, the Sanskrit hutam, which means when there's a fire lit with the intention of showing our dedication to the devas who make our life possible and to the divines who are beyond and behind them. When we place an offering into that fire, we're not asking for something. We've already had it. It's our dinner, or we're about to. We're saying we're being kept alive by you personifying the laws of nature. We promise to cooperate with those laws of nature. And this kalpa, this agreement, what we now call this ecology of the hutam, is the cycle of us building the fire, making the offering into the fire, the agni, which then creates a smoke which goes up symbolically as our offering to the source of everything. And then, last step, we take the ashes of that fire and put them back in the garden so we can grow another garden. And that's why that Agnihotra Yajna is also ecology. So it's a little ironic that that word went through German as Gutam, Dutch as Gut, and in the English word, I always like to have a little fanfare, it became the word God. Yes, that's right. That otherwise meaningless word, or mean everything word, is actually the smoke arising from a Vedic Agnihotra Yajna, designed to be the symptom of an ecological relationship with the laws of nature, so that we sustain civilization from generation to generation. And this is one of the hallmarks of the Vedic culture. So I like to bring it out when I see it happening in a verse in the Gita, so that it's clear to you that that one, might I say, stolen word, because I don't think it was borrowed. You don't hear Christians saying, oh yes, our word God comes from the Bhagavad Gita. I've never heard a Christian say that. But yes, it does actually. And the irony of that should reverberate down the hallways of the papal mansion as they consider that now it's common knowledge. So with that, I'm not just blowing smoke, I'm ready to fan the fire of our determination. So we'll begin with chapter 17, verse 23. And Sri Bhagavan says to Arjuna, the 3 words, Om, Tat, and Sat, have been described in the Vedic Shastra as the vibratory emanation of the transcendental Brahman realm. In ancient times, the Brahmins began performing yajna by repeating these mantras. And thus, these mantras are still remembered to this day as the prerequisite to any Vedic ritual. Om, Tat, Sat. to which I've added a little English. Om Hari Om Tat Sat, please remove what I am not. Next verse, 619. Therefore, the vibration of Om, or Omkara, is always uttered aloud at the beginning of activities involving yajna, dana, and tapasya. This sacred precept is always performed by those who were Brahmavadins, expounders of the teaching of Brahman. To continue, thus by uttering tat, may it be so, without desiring the phala, the fruit, from any act of yajna, tapasya, or dana. Those only seeking Brahman perform all their actions with the sole desire of achieving moksha from Prakriti by entering the realm of Brahman. And there you have the pivotal sentence that this chapter was leading us to. Yajna, a sacred offering of one kind or another, of which there are many. Tapasya, all of the diligent Vedic practices that improve us and upgrade our system to its highest possible level. And dana, or the recycling or the circulating of energy throughout society so that everyone is safe, everyone is fed, everyone has a chance of knowledge and is respected. So this chapter is ending on this very, very profound note. The word sat, again, means that which endures all change or transformation and is always true under any circumstance. It also describes the person who is sadhu, the personification of ultimate Brahman reality, whose words and actions cut away the bonds of material illusion. Thus, the word sat is spoken while performing any action that is intended to be sat. In other words, we're being schooled in reasserting our immortal nature, our undying nature as an Atma, while we're still within the context of Prakriti, of the realm of matter. And we're being shown the activities that sustain that awareness in us and allow us to act without negative consequences for others or ourselves. Next verse, second to last. When one is sthiti, steady, balanced, and constant in the sattvic performance of yajna, tapasya, and dana, that is to say, of sacred offering, of regenerative activities that are purifying, tapasya, and dana, the correct circulation of energy so that the entire social body is healthy and in a state of well-being. Om, Tat, Sat, Yajna, Tapasya, Dana, whose sacred activities are called Sat, Satya, from Brahman, always truthful, and all related actions are also considered to be Sat. And now the conclusion. Therefore, O Arjuna, any yajna whose hutam, sacred offering, is placed into the fire without sattvic shraddha, and any tapasya that is undertaken and practiced without sattvic Shraddha, are known as asat, or not true, and are without satya, or future truth, and beneficial outcome in this life or the next. And with this, Bhagavan Sri Krishna brought chapter 17 to a close, preparing us now for the concluding chapter, chapter 18. And we're only going to do a couple of verses from chapter 18, and then we're going to have a conversation conducted by Sandy between myself and Nilesh Oak, so that we can discuss these Vedic matters from the different perspectives that are our specialty. And we are so very fortunate to have Nilesh with us. He is one of the great sadhus and teachers and researchers and avant-garde spokespersons for the Vedic culture. And I'm always honored to consider him both a dear friend and someone in whose footsteps I am always following. And now, a couple of verses from chapter 18. Arjuna spoke. O Krishna, please explain to me the distinction between sannyas and tyaga, the two processes of detaching the Atma from its relationship with matter according to the Vedas. So this is the succinct summary of what yoga is. And I'd like you just to ponder for a moment, though it's wonderful that yoga has taken root in our culture, how very far most people practicing that Ashtanga part, that part of Ashtanga yoga, are still quite far from understanding who they are and what they're here to do and what their yoga is trying to accomplish. So one more time, O Krishna, please explain to me the distinction between sannyas and tyaga, the two processes of detaching the Atma from its relationship with matter according to the Vedas. So that is the summary of yoga. It is all of the processes that detach each one of us as an Atma from bondage to, identification with, and from misunderstanding our relationship with the Prakriti, the material energy that our bodies are made out of and that our environment is made out of, that we are surrounded with entirely. Yoga is the moksha, or going beyond, the definition of self as temporary and from Prakriti, from the temporary material energy. Next verse. Sri Bhagavan said, according to the Vedic rishis, the sannyasa path is followed by someone who has taken formal vows of renunciation or entered a monastic lifestyle. Whereas those who follow the path of tyaga act in the world without attachment to the fruits of their actions. He continues, some learned scholars say that all actions should be given up because they are filled with the flaws that cause future karmic reactions. Other sages say that the sacred actions of yajna, dana, and tapasya should never be abandoned. Now here Krishna is differentiating pathways like the Buddha Dharma, which essentially are about giving up our relationship with matter but do not go further than that. And so, in a sense, they're a negative state in their conclusion, but they are tyagi. They are giving up their attachment to matter. So you might say, in this definition, they're partway to the conclusion. Next verse, so Arjuna, now listen as I explain Tyaga. According to the Vedic literature, Arjuna, detachment is either sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic. Now this is very important because these three gunas, as we've seen before, are the three possible states. You could call it universal clarity, selfish interest, and uncaring ignorance. Sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic. So one's detachment could be emanating from any of those three states of consciousness. Next verse, number 5. The wise seers have determined that yajna, dana, and tapasya should never be given up in the name of tyaga, because those actions cleanse and purify all who perform them. Now this verse is very crucial. The wise seers have determined that yajna, which means the reciprocal offering back to the conscious beings who are making life possible, with the vow that I will cooperate with them, that's yajna. Dana, the circulation of energy throughout society so that everyone is benefited and cared for. And tapasya, the dedicated activities that make it possible for individuals to regenerate themselves and stay in the mood that is appropriate to being a sadhu, to live sattvically. Next verse, number 5. The wise seers have determined that yajna, dana, and tapasya should never be given up in the name of tyaga, because those actions cleanse and purify all who perform them. So it's a little bit like bathing. There's no circumstance under which it should be given up. So yajna, correct offerings. Dana, correct circulation of the energies of society throughout the social body. And tapasya, activities that perfect one's self, should never be abandoned. And remember the difference. Tyagi is everyone. Sannyas is a special step where you withdraw from living a material life as far as possible. So one is a sannyasi, one is a tyagi. So that your everyday person, all of us going on with our lives, are now being advised that if we're not going to be sannyasi, we should be tyagi. Next verse. O Arjuna, it is my unwavering position that the three sacred actions of tapasya, yajna, and dana go beyond the gunas. Therefore, they must be performed with no attachment to the results. Next verse. Even the practice of sannyas does not justify neglecting one's obligatory responsibilities of tapasya, yajna, and dana. Abandoning these is a form of moha or delusion that leads to tamas. Text 8. When the tapasya, yajna, and dana are not performed because they seem painful or too difficult, that tyaga is said to be compromised and is in Raja Guna, the selfish guna. Next verse. But when tapasya, yajna, and dana are performed because they are the appropriate thing to do, and with no attachment to the result, then that tyaga is sattvic, purifying, liberating, freeing us from any bondage and karmic responses. Last verse. One whose tyaga is sattvic is not attached to pleasing actions, nor repulsed by unpleasant work, and is freed from all doubts about the results of their work. And now I'm going to hand the microphone back to Sandy, and she will conduct a conversation between Nilesh and myself, and we'll discuss some of these topics and other things related to them. Sandy, over to you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Well, this is our third season of going through the Gita, and I think most of you have been with us since season 1. And each season, Jeffrey has explained it at a deeper and deeper level. And I would never presume to say I can remember the Gita. It's as much as you think I'm going to remember, we forget. And it's so important to read this book a little bit every day so it becomes a part of you. But can you imagine that this book was written, what people used to think 5,000 years ago, that was the belief? And Nilesh, through his research, has dated it now 7,500 and something years ago. I find it fascinating that these concepts that are spoken of in the Gita, which are so elevating, were written about 7,000 years ago. If you speak to the average Westerner, they think that they're the smartest kid on the block right now. And yet these elevated thoughts are 7,500 years old. Nilesh, can you shed some light on what India was like 7,500 years ago?
Namaskar, Sandy. I wish I knew the answer and all the details. Fortunately, Mahabharata text with 100,000 plus verses actually has, luckily for us, captured a lot that was happening during the Mahabharata times. In fact, Mahabharata author, and of course, understand there were multiple recensions. So Vyasadeva composed it, and then he taught to his Shishya, disciples. And then disciples taught to their disciples. And Vaishampayan, one of the disciples of Vyasadeva, he told to the grandson of Arjun, or rather the great-grandson, Janmejaya. And somebody is listening to it, Romaharshana Sauti, and then he goes to another place, Naimisharanya forest. Just like we are working in this digital forest these days, we can combine and come together in a different fashion. And all the sages are very excited to receive Romaharshana, and they say, where did you come from? And what was happening there? And he tells the story. I was there at the Yajna, the Sarpa Satra of Janmejaya. So the point I want to make it is that it does have few recensions, but these recensions have occurred over a period of not more than 100 years, from the time of, say, Mahabharata War to the time Vyasadeva composed the Mahabharata, to the time this was recited as it comes to us the last time in a Naimisha forest. And Mahabharata text boast, so we don't know exactly whose boast is that, within among these all composers, meaning the people who recited it again. But based on their experience, they're saying there is anything that you can think of is there in the Mahabharata. And it's very rare. It's almost practically impossible. But again, remember, the Vedic rishis, Vedic sages are pragmatic, practical, fearless, but also humble. So they use the word kvachit. There is something, something outside Mahabharata that can happen, but it is a very rare occurrence that something is there outside which is not there in Mahabharata. Now, this is a tall claim. When I started studying Mahabharata, I felt the same way. Frankly, Bhagavad Gita, when people told me that everything is in their Bhagavad Gita, 700 verses, I felt that was a tall claim too. But frankly, as you go through these deeper levels, you are in the round number 3. And it will be interesting to hear those who have followed through these 3 rounds, how they get layers of realizations. And so with that, I want to stop. But before we get into the Mahabharata and what is there, so just to answer your question, the Mahabharata has all the aspects, all the 6, 7 different aspects of our human life that we can refer to are covered in it. But before I go into Mahabharata, I want to give it back to you. But I want to also give a quick summary, a few points I want to add to what Jeffrey added today, the last portion of 17th chapter and just the beginning of 18th chapter. Back to you, Sandy.
Well, I don't want to stop you. I want to hear about the Mahabharata.
Okay.
Jeffrey, did you have something you want to say before he begins?
No.
No, Nilesh? We're excited. The Mahabharata, I don't know how many in our audience have read the Mahabharata yet. I know some of our students, we've sort of gone through it in a condensed version, but Jeffrey read the Mahabharata to me on one of our book tours years ago in the car. I used to drive, 8 to 12 hours getting us from here to Los Angeles. And he would read me the Mahabharata and the Ramayana in the car. So, there were times as he was reading it, my heart was just opening or I was crying and I'd say, stop reading that. It's just either heartbreaking or it's just so ecstatic. It's a beautiful book to read. So please illuminate it for those of us for those in the audience who haven't read it.
All right. And please, Sandy, if I forget, do remind me today. I will actually quote a couple of verses from the Bhagavad Gita itself, which is part of Mahabharata. And I promise, without any number crunching, without any detailed astronomy, I will show how even the couple of references from Bhagavad Gita also takes you back to 7,500 years. Okay, so in case I forget. A couple of things I wanted to add it, and it's always such a pleasure to listen to Jeffrey. In fact, someone in the comment made a beautiful comment, said, this was just getting interesting. And, because of me being there, I think, that interesting discourse was stopped, Jeffrey stopped the discourse. 17th chapter, Jeffrey mentioned something, and so otherwise it will bug me and I'll not able to focus on the Mahabharata discussion. So I thought I just need to mention it. 17th chapter is my favorite for a very simple reason. It's an emotional connection from the childhood. Like one of the school that I went through when I went to my 8th grade. 8th grade is where the middle school begins in India, or at least it began at that time. And I was lucky to go to a school where unless in every class, every grade, unless you have one chapter of Bhagavad Gita in Sanskrit by heart, you are not allowed to appear for the exam, like a midterm test and of course the final. And, so they know how to test it. They will say, chapter 17, verse number 4, say it. If you can't, you cannot appear for the exam. And so this is the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita that I got to study and I got to have it by heart, even without knowing the meaning of it, the translation of it. And I'll tell you from my experience, first-hand experience, I can tell you the value of it. because we used to recite it almost daily in the class. And by the end of the year, I don't know what magic happened, but my knowledge of Sanskrit was just not there at that time, although my mother tongue is close to it. But by the end of the year, actually, I could understand the meaning of these verses just by the fact I was reciting it practically every day during the school. Okay, so Jeffrey summarized it. I call this Karyakram Yoga. In an Indian context, just like we say, if you have a meeting, we call it agenda. This is like a daily agenda, Karyakrama Yoga. And those of you, and almost all of you, refer to Jeffrey's Gita Comes Alive. And I am not good with the bigger numbers, so I'm just going to quote the chapter number. But think of, as you study in your own daily sadhana, daily practice, chapter 17, think of the chapter, Bhagavad Gita, chapter 9 and verse 27. And see what a beautiful connection that chapter 9 has, especially verse 27, with the entire chapter 17. Now, chapter 9 is right in the middle of 18 chapters. So that's like a fulcrum, it's the balance. That's the Bhakti Yoga, as you know, the Bhakti Yoga chapter. Saint Dnyaneshwar, I don't know how many of you have heard the name. He was there around some 800, 900 years ago. Almost same time, just after Srila Madhvacharya. And when he took a Jivanta Samadhi, like, he literally, he was also from a very strong yoga tradition. He came as a disciplic succession. And at the age of 21, he took a live Samadhi. He asked people to put a brick wall around them, a total Samadhi. And live, 21 years old, he had already written a commentary on Bhagavad Gita. He sat inside, he asked them to put the last brick so that no more oxygen is coming in. He went into his dhyana and he took Samadhi. He separated himself from his body while chanting the 9th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the Bhakti Yoga. So that 9 chapter 27 verse, if you look at it, I'll just recite it. You don't have to look, everyone, if you don't want to. Yat karoshi yadashnasi yajjuhoshi dadasi yat pasyasi kaunteya tat kurushva madarpanam. And then if you split this, yat karoshi, the every action, every work, every act, kruti that you do, yad ashnasi, the diet, the food that you take, yajjuhosi, the yatnya, the activities, the activities for the creation, activities for getting our necessities through the process of yajna, dadasi, the dana, and Jeffrey mentioned it beautifully. I think I forgot the word he said. It's like this circle or balancing or something. Shankaracharya gives a beautiful definition of a dana. It says yathashakti samvibhaga iti dana. To the best of our abilities, making an effort to make an equitable distribution of wealth and everything else is a dana. And then tapasyasi is a tapa. And the last one, Tat Kurushva Madarpanam, is that what Jeffrey beautifully explained, Om Tat Sat. So literally that Shlok 9.27, when you split it into, is what is discussed in the 17th chapter. Quickly, on the question that Arjun is asking, beginning of the 18th chapter. Now, of course, 18th chapter is a summary chapter. If you look at the first verse that Jeffrey cited about the sannyas and tyaga, you can see a beautiful discussion of that has already happened in chapter 5, karma yoga and karma sannyas. And I'm glad, Jeffrey, you went through first 9 or so verses, because for everyone, the sannyas is not possible. Jeffrey also talked about a ritualistic tradition of taking a sannyas, such as a ekadandi or tridandi sannyas. But even from an ordinary perspective, we can look at sannyas in the sense of a sadhya, the ultimate sadhya, ultimately giving up. But that's not possible for everyone, nor even for a traditional sannyasi. That was the that was the verse, I think, somewhere number 6 or 7, which said even the sannyasi has to do the necessary minimal karma, the action. And so this is everything coming from chapter 5, which is in some sense another end, just like a chapter 2. And this is elaborated. So why is Arjun asking this question now between a sannyasa and a tyaga? One of the possible reason for that is if you go to say 14th chapter, where the sattva, raja, tama are discussed. And again, they are discussed in 17th chapter with respect to the tapa, dana, yajna. Again, 18th chapter starts discussing very beautifully with the tyaga in a sattva, raja, tama, like mode of goodness, mode of passion, mode of ignorance. The tyaga as an act, tyaga as a doer, the person, his mode of goodness, passion, ignorance. But in chapter 14, Krishna, just for those who might want to go back to it afterwards, Bhagavad Gita, chapter 14.6 and 14.7. Krishna gives the impression, of course, Krishna is now discussing each of this act in the 3 different modes, but Krishna gives the impression, at least to Arjun there, 14.6, and therefore to us, is that jnana, like a knowledge, sort of by definition is sattvic, is in the mode of goodness. For example, he says, Tatra sattvam nirmalatvam prakashaka namayam sukha sangena badnati jnana sangena chanaga. If you just remember the word sattva there in the context of a knowledge. And then the next verse, 14.7, karma, when he talks about karma, Krishna again gives the impression there that karma by definition is a raja, in a mode of a passion. Actually, we can relate to that because to perform an action, we need some desire. I mean, even if I want to just get up and get a glass of water, so like I have a desire that I'm thirsty. So by nature, it is sort of a rajo or mode of passion. Rajo ragatmakam viddhi trishna sanga samudbhavam tanni badnati kaunteya karma sangena dehinam. So that directionally he has said that. In fact, that is the reason why when we come to 17th chapter, Arjun asked another interesting question. He says, if somebody is doing with a shraddha, this shastra, is following the shastra with a shraddha, what kind of it is? Is it sattvic? Is it rajasic? Is it tamasic? Because shraddha, Arjun is assuming it is also sattvic, okay, by definition. Of course, Krishna says that's not so. There is actually within the shraddha, it can be sattvic, it can be rajasic, and it can be tamasic. And just one last point, just as a reference, I'll not go into the detail. The 18th chapter is a summary. And again, back, I want to go for a minute to the 9th chapter, which is a Bhakti Yoga, which is most of us here, all of us are thoroughly interested in. Just as an analysis, if you want to note down, think of the chapter 9, verse number 1, and then chapter 9, verse number 34, which is the last verse. And I'll just say those and do the comparison of those with chapter 18. And Jeffrey has not covered those verses today, but chapter 18, verse 64 and verse 65. I'll just chant those and I'll stop my long monologue on that. So chapter 9, verse number 1. And after that, I'll recite chapter 18, verse 64, just to tell you the similarity of it. Idam tu te guhya tamam. Guhya tamam is guhya is a very important word. Pravaksha myana suyave. Jnanam vijnana sahitam yajnatva mokshase shubhat. This is chapter 9, verse 1. Now, chapter 18, verse 64 is Sarva guhya tamam bhuya shrunume paramam vacha ishtoti se drudamiti tato vakshami tehitam. It is said exactly same thing in a slightly modified language. And again, now we go to the last verse of chapter 9. You will find the first portion in chapter 9 and chapter 18 is identical. Chapter 9, verse 34 says, Manmana bhava madbhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mame vaishyasi yuktaitvam atmanam matparayana Remember the first portion, Manmana Bhava Madbhakto Madhyaji Mam Namaskuru. And today, Jeffrey actually read that translation also at the end of 28 and so. And then 1865, the first portion is identical. Manmana Bhava Madbhakto Madhyaji Mam Namaskuru. Mame Vaishasi Satyam Te Prati Jane Priyosi Me. I'll not go into the translation, but I thought I wanted to bring that similarity. It's a balanced. Ninth is the center point, and now 18th is where Krishna is summarizing everything he has covered. Back to you, Sandy, and my apologies for going longer over this.
It's called sadhu sangha. The word sadhu in Sanskrit means one who cuts through the ropes that bind us to the unconscious state within matter by using the acts of Vedic Vidya, this new form of knowing which does not exist in our civilization. It is not a characteristic of most of the commons within the three Abrahamic religions, with no disrespect to them. They're just different. It's a different process. But what is so profound for us who were not introduced and initiated into this knowledge in our youth is that this yogic knowledge is treating us as if we are the decider. We, the individual, are at the center of this conversation. And you have to notice what's so very interesting is that it's a friendly conversation. And it requires you to make intelligent distinctions because it's a scientific conversation. And you can hear it when Nilesh speaks of it. You can hear the precision, and you can hear a lifetime of engaging with these ideas. And as he so importantly said, the Guhya Tamam, that this is a great secret. In fact, this is the greatest, the ultimate secret. Because remember that this conversation is the Supreme Person, Sri Bhagavan, Sri Krishna, who has come to earth as an avatar, not come by being forced to take birth, but come as his own representative to introduce himself to all of us so that we can form a personal relationship. When I listen to Nilesh sharing the different aspects of this, and they're intertwined with his growing up, I remember the feeling I had when I saw that my growing up had none of this. And I wanted it more than anything else. So there are two different kinds of acharyas, one who was breastfed with the Bhagavad Gita, and one who was so hungry that no other food could take the place of the Bhagavad Gita. But what they both have in common is that Bhagavan is telling us secrets. And anyone who's willing to listen is privy to those secrets, can know those most secret realities. In a very real sense, one of the most difficult things you'll face is believing that you could be important enough to be addressed by the ultimate and supreme being in such a user-friendly way, in such a straightforward, unambiguous way. This Bhagavad Gita is a heart-to-heart conversation. And Sri Bhagavan says to Arjuna, because you are my dear friend, I am going to reveal myself to you. And we're used to just the opposite, to some dangerous supreme power who might just punish us forever, who's already upset with us about something we don't remember doing. The whole other way of talking is just so frightening and intimidating and domineering and negative, and it's not charming. Even coming from a meek and mild representative, it still comes across with this, and I have to use an interesting word that I just recently, you've noticed that one of my favorite things to do is to debug English. And the word I looked up the other day was nepotism. Nepotism. Think about it. What does the English nepotism mean? Okay, get ready. The word nepot comes from the word nephew. Nepotism is the permission to do whatever they wanted that was given to the nephew of the Catholic Pope or his niece. Because they were relatives, they could do pretty much whatever they wanted. So despot and nespot are partnered words. Relatives. Despotism and nepotism are top-down, violence-oriented, corrupt at the gate, out the way out the door, not philosophical, based upon intimidation and danger. And absolutely none of these are present when Nilesh speaks the Gita, when I speak the Gita, when the Gita is spoken by anyone. It addresses each one of us as if the whole point of this is talking to us. And before I hand it back to Nilesh, I really want you to meditate upon that. That the difficulty for those born inside the tradition is it's hard for them to talk to us as the very beginners that we are. And it's hard for us to get enough Sanskrit words in us so we can keep up with what they're saying. But at this amazing moment in history, my best friends are Nilesh Oak and others like him. And they are my gurus, my best friends. They tell me wonderful secrets. And we share this amazing discourse. And we're bringing it into English, taking away the nepotism and the despotism and the unclarity. And oh, it's not God either. It's actually Bhagavan. Back to you, Nilesh.
All right, namaskar. And Sandy, please feel free to intervene anytime and stop me if I digress too much, or if I go in any direction. Just to add to what Jeffrey just said, in 18th chapter, in fact, the two verses that I quoted, 1864, 1865, and the next verse is again very famous verse. And that was puzzling to me when I started studying Bhagavad Gita. Because throughout Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, whoever tells this great knowledge to others is very dear to me, on. And he says this multiple times. In 1866, after those two verses that I covered, no connection with them, then he says, idam te natapaskaya nabhaktaya kadachana na chashu shushuve vachyam na cha mamyo bhyasuyati. Just as a quick summary, idam te natapaskaya. We are talking about tapasya. The person who is not into tapasya. Tapasya is not just for some sages in the forest. Tapasya is for all of us. Tapa literally means temperature. So anytime we do the action, our temperature goes up. We start sweating, for example. And what is that? Usually it's some action. And what is the connection of an action with a knowledge? The connection of action with a knowledge is given at the beginning of the 3rd chapter. In fact, Krishna has said what he wanted to say. And Krishna was actually as if thinking, okay, I have told everything I need to tell to Arjun. Arjun should be ready and let's start the war. Remember? This is at the beginning of a war. But Arjun says, no, hold on. So you told me about the Sankhya Yoga, you told me about the Buddhi Yoga, but you're praising they are better than the Karma Yoga, but you're also asking me to now go and fight. So which one I should do? And he was hoping that Krishna will say, do this and don't do this. Well, that's not Krishna. That's why he's also known, the Krishna's philosophy is also known by another word, a Sanskrit phrase. He says, Muraris Tritiya Pantha. Murari, the person with the flute, his path is the third path. It's neither this nor that. It's something else. Always something more. 1 + 1 = 3, or 1 + 1 = 10, something like this. So I was surprised why Krishna is now saying, Idam te na tapaskaya, the person who doesn't have a tapasya. I'm just connecting with the point that Jeffrey made. Na tapaskaya, na bhaktaya, the person who doesn't have a shraddha, bhakta, the person who doesn't have a reverence. The person, suppose you are listening to a teacher, you're listening to some individual, but you don't have reverence for what he or she is going to say. Well, guess what? There is no point listening to that person, and there is no point for the teacher to tell you anything, because even if they do it, it's a waste of time, because there is no reverence, respect for that person. Na tapaskaya, na bhaktaya kadachana, na chashu shrushuve vacha. The person is not listening, not interested in hearing, not interested in listening. Nachamamyo vyasuyati. And the person feels envious at the person, at the speaker, let's say. And initially I thought, so what? Krishna is saying that go and tell everyone. In some sense, I have to learn through my experience, because I had this habit of going, catching everyone and just telling whatever I know. And I soon realized it actually backfires. People don't like that. They will say, this guy is a talkative, which I am, guilty as charged. But that's the purpose. That's the meaning of that 18.66. It doesn't say don't share the knowledge, but definitely get into some idea, have some idea about the qualification of the listener, and try to understand maybe what they would like to listen to too, and only to that extent share. And that's why, in a way, if you look at it, you are looking at the same Bhagavad Gita, and Jeffrey is walking you through round 1 and round 2 and round 3. And hopefully, I'm confident actually that you would be seeing the different layers. The next time you come to the same verse, you get a totally different realization. Okay, not opposite realization, but a different realization, a deeper realization. With that, back to you, Sandy.
That is so true, Nilesh. I think we've all felt that, and I've had many letters from the audience here saying just that, of how, oh my goodness, how did that verse slip by me? I have to say that having the privilege of listening to both you and Jeffrey going back and forth in the Gita, we actually haven't had a chance to make these connections yet, because Jeffrey's teaching so much of the Sanskrit words as we go along. So it's a great privilege to be able to speak with somebody who has such a depth of Sanskrit just off the top of his head. And I don't know if you saw in Dallas last week on Krishna's birthday, 2,000 children chanted the Bhagavad Gita from beginning to end for Krishna's appearance day. It was just amazing. And I know schools in India, they start these children at age 4. And as you said, you don't know the meaning at that point, but the vibration of the Sanskrit does its magic over time, over years. Jeffrey, I know you wanted to say something. I could see you wanting to comment. So I'll turn it over to you, and then let's go back to the Mahabharata with Nilesh in a moment. Jeffrey?
Thank you so much, Sandy. And Nilesh, sadhu, sadhu, what a joy. And to all the students, sadhu, sadhu is what we say when we're receiving the benefit of someone who's done tapasya, who's lived this, who embodies this. And interestingly enough, as you must have observed with human beings, as soon as they stop misbehaving, they're interesting. If you can get them on a good day, you see something beautiful and amazing in them, And perhaps even they don't see it as clearly as you do, because the outsider in some ways sees with new eyes. So just as Nileshji has a huge amount of the Bhagavad Gita living within him through the privilege and benefit and determination he had to internalize it. So I, who, coming in from the outside, I had to grab a hold of those parts that were the most concise and wouldn't change and summarize the whole thing. So to bring your attention to the fact that Sri Bhagavan is the source of everything. Just sit with that for a moment. Bhagavan. Everything, every fragment of beauty, every bit of desirable reality that any of us have ever pursued is just a little speck of Bhagavan. As if somebody wearing a beautiful garment is shedding diamonds or shedding some beautiful jewel that are woven into its fabric. And you see little sparkling results of their walking by. So all the beauty sparkling in this world, all of the wonder that we see all around us that has so engaged our attention. The way I like to say this is modern science has kind of epitomized this. They're immensely interested in how it works and have no interest in who created it. So this conversation is just the opposite. This is a conversation amongst people who are looked at it again and again and again and again with amazement. And then they want to draw closer to the very being from which it's emanating, because if there's no being, then your own being is useless. Just think for a moment. If there is no ultimate being, then your individuality is the last thing to go on the pile and get burned. And that makes the whole thing futile, the whole thing a stupid exercise in futility with no continuing of something beautiful, no continuity, simply at a certain time, it goes up in smoke and we're done. So for me, there were 4 verses that I committed to memory first. Chapter 10, verses 8, 9, 10, and 11. Aham sarvasya prabhavo. Bhagavan's talking. Aham sarvasya prabhavo matak sarvam pravartate. Iti madva bhajanti mam. Buddha bhava samanvita. Mach chita madgata prana. Bodhiyantak parasparam. Kathayantascha mam nityam. Tushanti cha ramanti cha. Tesham satati yuktanam. Bhajatam priti purvakam. Dadami buddhi yogam tvam. Genamam upayanti te tesham evanukam partham. Aham jnanajam tamaha. Nashami atma bhavasta. Jnanadipena bhasvataha. Now listen in English. The Supreme Being is talking. I am the source of everything. That should get you sitting up in your chair. From me the entire creation flows. Knowing this, the wise adore me with all their hearts. Their thoughts dwell in me, their lives are surrendered unto me, and they derive great satisfaction and ecstasy, enlightening one another and conversing about me, just like we're doing. To those who are constantly devoted and adore me with purest devotion, I give the understanding by which they may come to me. Out of compassion for them, I, who am dwelling within their hearts, destroy the darkness born of ignorance with the shining lamp of Vedic Vidya, with the shining lamp of this simple and yet so profound understanding. And one of the most amazing things that dear Nilesh has done is he's used his scientific brilliance and memory and intense investigating urge to go back into, and I'll have him tell you what this means in a minute, Iti Hasa. Don't use the English word history. Call it what it is. It's Iti Hasa. It's as it really was. And that would be empty words unless someone could show you where in the text was the proof that it was the way it was. So I'd like you, Nilesh, to just give us a little insight into how you went down that trail, because your unique contribution to this conversation, aside from your lifetime dedication to it and it living inside you, is that you've done something scientific and mathematical that is irrefutable and is in the Sanskrit, which my students have heard me often speak of, and its Veda Angas and the limbs that make it different than anything else. So would you be so kind, since we have you here, to explain a little bit how this revelation of the point in time of these amazing events took place for you in the midst of your learning and journey?
Namaskar. Thank you, Jeffrey. The word Iti Hasa is very important. And Jeffrey said, don't use the word history. Definitely don't use the word mythology. That's actually many Indians I see, using the word mythology when they refer to Puranas, when they refer to Mahabharata, when they refer to Ramayana. But something more. Definitely Iti Hasa includes history, in the sense it happened on this day, then it happened this day, and who did what to whom. That is also there. But it's very important to understand the purpose behind Iti Hasa, Iti Hasa, that is the split of that word, versus the history. I'll not go into history. Most of us are familiar with it. And it's useful. I mean, we are not denying the importance of it. But let's understand from the internal perspective what Iti Hasa meant. And then I'll get to my contribution in establishing that, yes, it is indeed Iti Hasa, which means this is how it happened. Iti Hasa. This is how it happened. Now, how is this different than a Iti Hasa versus history? In the West, for the most part, until say 14th century, 15th century, the sort of the modern, the European Renaissance came into being. Usually the Bible was the history, okay, for most part. Now, there were some exceptions. Some of you might have read Herodotus' book. It's translated, of course, as History of the World. And, it's a very interesting book. I mean, very thick book, by the way. I have read it multiple times, as a matter of fact. And some very interesting writings from the French writers too. But let's get into the definition of Iti Hasa, and then I'll get into the dating aspect of Iti Hasa. But Iti Hasa has a lot more aspect. There is one definition. I'll say the Sanskrit shlok first. In fact, I wasn't sure if I will say it right. So as Jeffrey was speaking, I wrote it down from my memory so that I don't make a mistake when I say it. The shlok goes something like this. Dharmartha, Kama, Mokshanam. These are the four Purushartha that I'm sure Jeffrey has talked with you many times. Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. Dharmartha, Kama, Mokshanam. Upadesham, Samanvitam. Purvavrittam, Kathayuktam, Itihasa, Prachakshate. So in order to create, you can call encyclopedia, you can call it a guidebook, to educate, enlighten the masses while also entertaining. To educate on what? Educate on how to achieve dharma, how to achieve artha, how to achieve kama, how to achieve moksha. And when this encyclopedia or guidebook is created by this following way, Purva Vrittam Kathayuktam Iti Hasam Prachakshate, by using a historical incident, historical event, or series of events, and told to us in a katha form, which is to say, with its facts, but also in an entertaining fashion, in an educational fashion, okay, and with the aim of enlightening, it is called Iti Hasa. Iti Hasa. Now, let me tell you a big difference between how histories are written around the world, including India these days, and how the Itihasa, especially the one that you are familiar with, Ramayana and Mahabharata, are written. The big difference, there is big difference, and this difference is this. Again, I'm not saying anything wrong with the way history is written, but mostly it is an analysis of everything that is available in the past, different documents, trying to put the things together, trying to connect the dots and fill in the gaps with whatever we may not know. That's how history is written. So the person who is writing a history is there in the present when he or she wrote it, looking at the back, looking at whatever evidence is available with their own imaginations, unfortunately, because that's how the Western historiography or historicism, that ism, has come into being. Contrast this with how Ramayana and Mahabharata are written, especially these two Itihasa. Purana is a different story, and Purana is also like a Itihas, but they are not called Itihas in the same sense. Mahabharata is called Itihasa and Ramayana is called Itihasa. And what's the big difference? The big difference is the composers and the writers of Ramayana and Mahabharata are contemporary to those times. Vyasadeva, Bhagavan Vyasadeva, is there. He's one of the character, actually. He's one of the character in the sense, I'm not saying a novel. He's one of the living individual and very much an active part of what's happening in Mahabharata. And in case of Valmiki, ditto. He's also contemporary to Ramayana, contemporary to Rama's time, and he is the one who took Sita to his ashram, and that's where two boys were born to Sita. So that's the one difference. Quickly, let me add as a metaphorical way, and I'll give it back to you and Jeffrey, you and Sandy. How did I do this? The curiosity, like Shankaracharya mentions, or Vachaspati Mishra mentions, you want to do something because if you solve that problem, then it leads to something useful. Because we can do all kinds of things. I mean, I can play video games for hours. Now, of course, it may refine my certain faculties and abilities, so it might have a value. But at the end of it, it should be able to solve some of the problems, some of the challenges that we feel. And one of the challenge with related to Ramayana or Mahabharata is that when the colonial times, when the Western Europe specifically became connected with India, and they could actually see through the evidence from these texts like Mahabharata and Ramayana, but it did not jive well with what they knew or what they assumed, because they were under, and many of you would be aware of this, that at that time, we are talking, say, 400-500 years ago, or even less than that, they were under the impression that not just Earth or Sun, but the entire universe that we know or we see began in 4004 BCE. That was a Western European estimate. Against that, when they came across these big numbers of antiquity in the Indian context, they said something has to be wrong. And therefore, unfortunately, what happened is they tried to compress all of this and try to fit it within last 3,500 years. Okay. And that doesn't make sense, because if you make an error one place, it's going to come and haunt you some other place. That's where my curiosity began. And just without again going into the technicalities of it, and we'll discuss a little bit of it, especially from Bhagavad Gita. Last time I talked to Jeffrey and Sandy one time, and I was using this metaphor. So let's start with Mahabharata. I came across one specific verse in Mahabharata that fascinated me. The reason it fascinated me is because what is being described as true at the time of Mahabharata is not true in our times. Not only it is not true in our times, but it is considered by all the scientists, all astronomers, all physicists, that it is impossible in the very order of nature. Okay. And in my Shraddha, reverence, and conviction in the words of VASA, which is the words of Bhagavad Gita and Mahabharata, I said, why would Vyasadeva write something that may appear extremely crazy to us, impossible, but he has written it. And he has not written with some big fanfare. He has written as a matter of fact, in a very casual fashion. That's the tone in Mahabharata. Then I spent 15 years working on it. In fact, I thought it will take me maybe a 1 week. Maybe the ego and a pride of an engineer. Okay, this, by the way, this happened in Canada. Those of you who are in Canada, I was in Edmonton, Alberta, doing my master's. My master's thesis was ready and I had some free time. I said, let me just 1 week and I'll do it. This was 1995. And then lo and behold, it took me 15 years, 15, to work on this one shlok of Mahabharata. Okay, to find out why Vyasadeva would say this. And if it is true, can I, with all the modern logic, with all the modern science, with all the modern astronomy, empirical science, mathematics, can I prove it beyond any doubt? And that took me 15 years. Now, so last time when I was describing, I said, this is just for one verse, one reference. But once I saw this, I got so excited. Then I started reading Mahabharata, and you have to trust me on this one. On the Shraddha, you can only take it. I have read Mahabharata at least 30 times. Okay. and still, if you ask me something about Mahabharata, don't be surprised if I tell you, oh, is this there in the Mahabharata? Because it's so huge. And remember, I was focusing on a very certain aspect of Mahabharata. So Mahabharata can last us for multiple lifetimes. So you better have a Shraddha in reincarnation. Okay, very, very much important. So I told, like as a metaphor, imagine solving a crossword puzzle, or imagine solving a jigsaw puzzle. And today I'm going to add one more thing, because I realized that somebody asked me a question, and I realized that just explaining what I did is like solving a complex jigsaw puzzle and crossword puzzle together is not sufficient. There is something else that I just used the word, the video game. Imagine this, in the video game, all kinds of fighting games you might be playing, the things are changing all the time, and they're kind of changing in a random fashion, or at least it appears random. So imagine this as a metaphor, a complex puzzle that's like a combination of a jigsaw puzzle, combination of a crossword puzzle, and a combination of a video game, which changes with the time. If you bring it together, okay, that's this mystical piece that I, by the mercy of Vyasadeva and by the blessings of great gurus like you have here and many others, I could do it. And is this like I'm making up a story for you? Like saying this is some kind of a puzzle? Actually not. Vyasadeva is saying this in the Mahabharata itself. Now, I came across this verse after I solved the puzzle. I did not know this verse. Okay. So if most of you may know the story, if not, I'll quickly tell the story. Once after 18 years after the Mahabharata War, Vyasadeva sat down in a cave in Himalayas to write down, to compose the Mahabharata. If we have information, it says it took Vyasadeva 3 years to do this. And he also needed an expert typist in modern language. And you may know who that was, Bhagwan Ganesh, okay, with the elephant, elephant head. He was the expert typist. And so they had this whole discussion, negotiation. So Ganesha put a condition to Vasudeva. He said, I will be willing to be your typist. It's a long-term project, provided I don't have to wait and watch. And I don't have to stop while you are thinking. Okay, that's how the negotiation goes. So Vasudeva said, I will follow your condition. I will keep you busy. But here is my condition. Unless you truly understand what I am narrating, what I am stating, you should not put the pen to the paper. These are great divine personalities, okay, writing it together. And they wrote it down. When finally this 100,000 plus verses, beautiful Iti Hasa was written, it is described by Vasudeva like this. Grantham Granthi Tada Chakre Munir Gudam Kutuhalat. I'll translate it for you. Kutuhalat. This book is filled with curiosities, curious things. Grantham Granthi Tada Chakre Munir Gudam Kutuhalat is full of curiosities. It's good, the word that Jeffrey G used, Kavindra Ji used it in today's discussion, and even I quoted a couple of times. It's mysterious. Grantham Granthi Tada Chakre Munir Gudam. Muni is the Vasudeva. Vasudeva has deliberately put the puzzles here. And one more thing, Grantham Granthi. The Grantha is like a book, but the Granthi is a twist. Okay, there are deliberate twists put into it by Vasudeva. And why did he do that? So that a careless and a casual reader would not do any changes, any distortions with it. The person will not understand it. With Shraddha, he may or she may just repeat it, but not modify it. Because to modify, you should know what it is. And he left it for all of us with little bit knowledge of, and Jeffrey, I'll ask Kavindra Ji to talk about the Vedangas, the 6 limbs of the Veda. With information from all these 6 dimensions, we can actually decipher it and understand the dating aspect of it, understand the mysteries, understand the curiosities, and everything else. Back to you.
Do I have to speak? I want to hear more of the secrets. I'll just speak for a moment. Just to give some substantiality, lest Nilesh sound so excited about his research that it could be apparently his own excitement. This amazing 100,000 verse Iti Hasa, in the case of the Mahabharata, what to speak of the 24,000 verses of the Ramayana. In both cases, these amazing texts and the secrets they contain need to be contained by something different than we're used to. And what we're used to is a sloppy, contradictory, unpredictable, and often contradictory language, the English language, which is full of traps and pitfalls and words whose meaning we think we know, but we do not know. So, after all, what is the game post office in our culture other than saying something to one of 35 people at a party, whispering it in their ear, and they pass it around the room. And by the time it gets to the 35th person, it's nothing like what you said in the beginning. And what I want you all to know, and briefly so he can tell us more about it, is that what Nilesh is talking about is a massive text that is also full of secrets. And he is an investigator into some of those secrets, which require both mathematical, astronomical, historical insights and perspectives, so that you can see the puzzles rather than, here's the secret, what we're used to, which is blind faith history. We, in Western civilization, have blind faith religions that do not have what? Why do I say that of them? Why isn't Latin sufficient? Why wasn't Greek sufficient? Because in their construction, these languages were not designed, whoever designed them, to be completely perfect in passing knowledge forward through time without loss or distortion. And I'm only going to talk about them briefly, but there are 6 Veda Angas. And these are called the 6 limbs of the Veda. So think of the Veda itself as a body, as a huge body of knowledge that's moving or going to move forward through history. If it's going to do so successfully, it has to be told the same from generation to generation. The words can't drift. The meaning can't drift. Each word has to mean what it meant 1,000 years ago. It has to mean what it meant 3,000 years ago. It has to mean what it meant because of rules that contain the meaning to that passage, to a whole grouping of passages. And all of those precise meanings have to remain the same over thousands and thousands of years. And if they don't, we have no hope of knowing what they meant. This story that Nilesh told of Ganesha and Vyasadeva is to show us something that's secret in the background. Not only did Vyasa tell this story in Sanskrit, and Ganesha wrote it down in Sanskrit, but Sanskrit has 4 departments that are specifically defined so that there is no exceptions, or almost none, in their meaning over time. They do not drift, they do not go away, they do not get subverted, because to pass them forward, one must pass them forward under the rules of the language. So quickly, and then back to Nilesh. There are 4 linguistic sciences that are given in the 6 Veda Angas that are directly relevant to this conversation and which Nilesh has capitalized upon for the stability of his research. Number 1, Shiksha. The 50 letters of the Sanskrit alphabet are always pronounced a particular way. You can't speak it in a southern accent and call that scam squeak tam. You can't do it that way because it's not allowed. You can't drift in the way that you say it. Bahunam, Janmanamante, Yanavanmam, Prapadyate. All of the pronunciation is precise, scientific, unvarying, unerring, and exactly the same. And that's called Shiksha. Number 2 is Vyakarana, which took a little while to get finalized. But in their final form are 4,000 grammatical rules, which my professor of Sanskritam knew. He was a Benares Pundit, and he had memorized all 4,000 grammatical rules of the Sanskrit language. You'd say something in Sanskrit, he'd say rule number 2,221, if this, then this, and that. That's a pundit. I'm a nobody. That's a pundit. That's Pandita. And he knew all 4,000 of these grammatical rules, which means everything said in Sanskrit is precise, with a grammatical set of grammatical rules to support its structure, its placement. And then the next is called Nirukta. That was the second. This is the third. It's called Nirukta. In Sanskrit language, there are 2,212 roots. Dhatu, they're called. Those dhatus or roots are the very bottom line basis. They're the core of a word. They have a precise meaning, and they're a precise root, and they're rules of how words are built out from those roots. And those roots are the Vyakarana, are the 4,000 grammatical rules, in addition to the phonetic rules. And now we have the etymological rules, meaning the words in Sanskrit have the same meaning forever. There is no drift and no change in their meaning because they're rooted in something that was established more thousands of years ago than I can even tell you, but before the two epics, the two Iti Hasas, and that means more than 12,000 years ago, these rules of Sanskrit were all in place so that this knowledge could be carried forward by a reliable language whose meanings never drift away over time. And finally, in order for this to be accomplished in a culture without printing presses, in a memorization-based culture, there was something called chandas. And chandas is poetry. If you've ever studied Shakespeare, you know that he wrote in iambic pentameter quite a bit, or iambic meter, which is down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. You know this one. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether or not 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer. If you heard actors doing that, you wouldn't hear the rhythm unless you listened. It's in the background. But that rhythm is there. It's the chandas. And so in all of the Vedic literature, there is a chandas. There is a particular meter that allows the knowledge to be memorized perfectly because it's constructed perfectly as a poetic unit, so it has an integrity of its own. And if you listen to the Gayatri mantra real quick, Tat Savitur Vareniyam, 8 syllables. Next line, Diyo Yona Prachodayat. So, Om Bhurbuva Svatat Savitur Vareniyam Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi Diyo Yona Prachodayat. That particular mantra has been passed forward through time with 8 phonemes or phonetic units in each of the 3 lines, and those 3 lines are something called Gayatri Chandas. So just so as you know, and I'm going to hand it back to Nilesh now, behind his research is a deep understanding of the stability of the Sanskrit language with these 4 scientific departments so that it is unwavering, unerring, and there is not another language on our planet that is so precise and so able to pass things forward through history without any entropy, without any loss, without any distortion. And so with that, because we could talk about this for a long time, I want to go back to Nilesh, and I want you to take the rest of the time, Nilesh, to elaborate upon this as much as you can.
We have a couple questions. If you have a question, just use the hand on your screen, and we'll try and get to them. So Nilesh, you want to take about 5 or 10 minutes to finish that
Yes.
segment, please?
Yeah, I will. I'll take 5 minutes.
Could listen to you all night.
Yeah, 10 minutes. I'll take 10 minutes and summarize. Please raise your hand afterwards for question, or even better still, if you have ability, you may type the question. So that's easy for me to read. So quickly, not going into too much detail. So the story I was telling, I quoted that verse because somebody asked the question. I have typed that verse in the comments. Ya chaisha visuta rajas trailoke sadhu sammata arundati taya pesha vasishta prushtata kruta. So Vyasadeva is telling Dhritarashtra, just a day before the war, my dear king, I'm seeing all kinds of signs out there. And he also assures Dhritarashtra, because Dhritarashtra is not listening to him. Dhritarashtra is the father of Kauravas. And he said, I am going to write this whole Iti Hasa for posterity, for the benefit. And among these, he gives the signs. He tells the signs. And one of the things he says is that star Arundhati, which is Alcor in modern astronomy, has gone ahead of star Vashishta or Mizar. And that was that problem that took me 15 years, working on it between Edmonton, Calgary, and Atlanta. Well, the outcome was, it told me and told all of us that that particular event is only possible, not just one day, it's possible, it can happen for for a long time. But it is not possible, it will not happen anytime in the last 6,500 years, which meant the Mahabharata War happened before that time. But that's just one reference. Then I found 300 plus, okay? And those all come together like solving a jigsaw puzzle, a crossword puzzle, and playing a video game effectively and winning it leads you to 5561 BCE. But quickly, I want to quote two references today, which are not part of that 300 plus, by the way, and they are from Bhagavad Gita. Even I wouldn't have thought there was something in Bhagavad Gita itself that will help me with the dating of the Mahabharata, the text itself. So last time when Jeffrey stopped, he quoted something from 10th chapter and a couple of verses there. From the same 10th chapter, and I can even tell you the number, like number 393, and of course 10th chapter verse 21. To keep track of time, I will skip reading in the Sanskrit. I might say just a one word or so. If you read the translation, Sri Krishna continued, among the Adityas, I am Vishnu. There are 12 Adityas, referring to the 12 solar months. Okay, now this is not explained, but that's the background. Of lights, I am Ravi, as in the radiant sun. That is the name for Ravi. Of the Maruts, I am the Marichi. We'll skip that because of time again, but it's all related to this. And the last one, among the Nakshatras, I am the Shashi, as in moon. Now, every single word there is actually in the modern language, it's a hyperlink. Like we need to click on it and read a lot more. So I'm going to make it shorter. The nakshatras are also have a nakshatra devata, a deity associated with it. And so when Krishna is actually saying, among the nakshatras, I am the Shashi, nakshatrana maham Shashi. Okay, that's what he's saying. He's referring to the nakshatra devata, Shashi, and therefore referring to that nakshatra. Just you have to take it on a shraddha, but you can always verify that nakshatra is nakshatra Mruga Shirsha, one of the 27 nakshatra. And what's so big deal? This particular verse, remember, it's referring to the 12 solar months. It is referring to the solar Indian calendar, which begins with the spring equinox. Think of as a 21st of March. At the time of Mahabharata, when that 21st of March equivalent spring equinox came, the sun was in the Mruga Shirsha Nakshatra. That is what this is referring to. Okay, so this is one reference. Just stay with me. I'm going to combine the two. When we think of a lunar month, it's exactly opposite because the full moon position is exactly opposite to the position of the sun. That's why it is full moon. From Earth, we can see fully brightened. Now go to verse 407 or chapter 10, verse 35. I think I'm saying the right. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Among the Vedic melodies, I am the Brihat Sama. I'll skip that right now. Of poetic meters, I'm the Gayatri Chanda that Jeffrey just referred to, the Chanda Shastra. The next two lines are important. Among the masses, the months, I am Mrugashirsha, the lunar month of Margashirsha. Okay. And Jeffrey has given a good note there. This is going to be very useful. It says the nakshatras bridging November, December, the lunar month that occurs during December in our times, which is what? December 21st is the winter solstice. That's when Bhishma passed away. But Bhishma was on the bed of arrows for more than 95 days, and he fell in the battle on the 10th day. So the battle began definitely more than 105 days or so. Now the crux. So the Margashirsha or the Gita Jayanti, the birthday of Bhagavad Gita, per the Indian lunisolar calendar comes Gita Jayanti, we call it, right? Sometime usually occurs in December, right? So that happens now. But that Margashirsha, the lunar month that happens in December now, that occurred about 4 months earlier at the time of Mahabharata. That's what this Bhishma Nirvana evidence and this verse 10.35 is telling us. So it was the first lunar month of the lunar year of an Indian lunar calendar of that time. And the lunar year began with the pre-autumn season. Think of 1 month before 21st September. From that time all the way to 21st December, Bhishma is on the bed of arrows. Now, there is something in astronomy that tells us this shift of a lunar month with respect to season happens by 1 month every 2000 years. And there is a shift of 4 months. So 2000 times 4 is back of the envelope calculation, approximately 8,000 years ago. And just as it's in the back of envelope, so I happen to have an envelope, so I thought I'll show that. So back of the envelope calculation, if you do it, approximately 8,000 years ago. Quickly, so I'm done. Quickly, let me take Manjunath's questions. And if there are any additional questions, we will do that. Manjunath asked a wonderful question. He said, since Vedas are mentioned in Mahabharata, but Mahabharata is not mentioned in the Vedas, and I'll make one, I'll skip that comment for today. Maybe in another Gita class, we'll do that. But since Vedas are mentioned in the Mahabharata, and Mahabharata happened 5561 BC, more than 7,500 years ago, is it fair, is it safe to say, that was his comment rather, not more than a question, that Vedas are definitely older than 7,500 years ago? That's a beautiful scientific, logical way of deduction. And yes, that's correct. In fact, I'll just go further and say Vedas are also mentioned in the Ramayana. And I have shown using exactly similar methodology that Ramayana happened more than 14,000 years ago. So that also tells you that Vedas are older than 14,000 years. Back to you, Sandy, or Jeffrey, or whoever want to handle the questions.
My goodness, I have a million questions, but does anybody else have any questions? Raise your hand if you do. This is your opportunity. Zubin, go ahead.
Namaste, Nilesh. If you're saying that the Ramayana happened around 14,000 years ago, then what are the calculations of the Yuga cycles then? Because I understand the calculations of the Yuga cycles to be, 1.78 million years, 1.2, 864,000, 432,000.
Okay, great question. I am going to give a short answer. The subject is so vast that it is impossible to cover in 1 day, never mind 1 minute, okay? However, Zubin, I would encourage you, if you do watch YouTube, like if you go to YouTube, type Nilesh Oak and Yuga, you're going to get up to 10 talks. And they answer your question in extreme detail and to a full satisfaction. Okay, thank you.
I love Manjunath's comment in here. Nilesh, could you please write a book that could top the Da Vinci Code with a storyline of your journey covering this deep mystery amidst the institutional established misconception of the dates? Well, I'm sure I'm sure he could. Whether he has the time, I don't know.
Well, I should admit that by grace of Krishna, I have this natural inclination to solve tough problems and mysteries and whatnot. When it comes to writing beautifully, like in a novel format, I'm very incompetent. So definitely I will need somebody's guidance. So everyone who is listening to it, if there is a novelist, either established novelist or a hidden novelist, I would be very happy to work with that individual.
Well, you know that many of these great authors don't write the books anymore. I mean, I won't mention names, but how can somebody write 52 books in a lifetime without ghostwriters? So they abound everywhere. And we have some very good editors in our group here who can help you edit if you get things along the way. All right, we have about 4 more minutes. Jeffrey, would you like to conclude with any questions for Nilesh or wrap it up? I think this has been an absolutely amazing conversation. We've hardly scratched the surface. Having two great acharyas like this, being able to ask questions. People, we're going to do it again next week. Share this last link with your friends. It's the last link of the month. Please invite more people so that they can have the benefit of this. So let us know. Jeffrey G, I'm going to turn it over to you and let's hear what you have to say. Nilesh, you were wonderful. We love you. Thank you so very much for being with us today. Jai.
I want to second, third, fourth, and fifth that. All my multiple personalities, they're all thrilled and excited at having Nilesh with us today. And I want more and more and more. So when you get greedy, you know you're with a pundit. You know you're with someone who lives what they're speaking. And you know that they've gotten to the heart of something profound that is valuable and there for all of us. So I just want to echo that in the part of chapter 18, verse 13, when Sri Bhagavan says, "O Arjuna, now focus your buddhi faculty and listen to me very carefully as I describe the 5 factors of accomplishing any action, as it is proclaimed in the Vedic darshan of the Sankhya teachings." What we have experienced today in the tapasya and determination and the focus, the drita, the intense hunger of Nileshji in the pursuit of these secrets that are sitting out in the open to the right people, but hidden from so many, these many corners and layers and departments of the Vedic Vidya have presented themselves as a bit of a problem to the rest of the world, mostly because we weren't ready for an intelligent conversation to be conducted at that level. We are unprepared. So, the historical moment is right. And as far as I'm concerned, before there was R, there was Nilesh Oak, Satish Sharma, people like them who've been brooding upon this for 20, 30 years and thinking only one thought, one samadhi, one pointed focus, dharana, that I wish you would show me the deep secrets that are being carried forward in this profound library of learning. And through people like Nilesh, this is becoming more and more obvious. So Nilesh, thank you for being with us. Let's do this again and again and again. I'll have you say goodbye to everyone after I just chant a little mantra, and then I'll end with Nilesh saying a goodbye temporarily to all of you. And do tell them how they can hear more and how they can be closer and draw closer to what you're doing, which is our great hope as well. So everyone, just remember that in the excitement of all of this great Vedic Vidya, we break out into song. Our heart reaches out and it goes from a discourse, an amazing discourse, the most amazing we've ever heard, to our nature is to become so excited that talking isn't enough. Hari Haraya Namaha Krishna Yadavaya Namaha Yadavaya Madhavaya Keshavaya Namaha Gopala Govinda Ram Shri Madhu Sudan Giridhari Gopinatha Mahadana Mohan. I won't take up more of our time. But at a certain point, it's necessary to go to that stage of excitement and to let your heart directly reach out. And with the right guru and teacher and acharya, you will learn mantras and songs like that that allow us to go direct, even beyond this direct discourse, and go directly to heart feeling the highest of the darshans. And with that, back to you to end our time together. Nileshji, so wonderful being here with you.
Thank you. You said it so eloquently that I really don't like myself to be the last person, that we could have ended on the note that you just sang. But since you have asked, I'll mention those people who may be interested in knowing more about it. I wrote 3 books. And the reason I mention, one is, I don't have it here with me, Bhishma Nirvana. And that's my 3rd book. And keep in mind, these books are written by somebody who never thought he will write anything. So first book when I wrote, and it says, oh, how did you think of writing and how many books you have written? I would say, well, it's a book written by a plastic salesperson, because that's what I was, when I was searching. But somebody mentioned, so there are 3 books. You can check it on Amazon just with my name if you are curious and interested. Those who are not into reading, they can watch my YouTube videos. There are hundreds of them out there. Just type my name and you will find one. But somebody mentioned an audio book, and I'm very happy to tell you very soon, this book, this is my first book, When Did the Mahabharata War Happen? The Mystery of Arundhati. This is all completed as an audio book right now, going through the final edits. I did not have to do anything. Somebody from United Kingdom took charge of it, worked with a professional speaker, auditor, whatever they are called, and got it done. And soon it should be out, this particular book, which gets into the dating of the Mahabharata. And thank you, everyone, for being here today and offering me an opportunity, Kavindra ji, Sandy ji, and the entire team. It was just wonderful. Thank you.
Our pleasure, Nilesh, Jeffrey. It was wonderful having you both on here. So on behalf of VASA and Gita Comes Alive, thank you all for being here. And we'll see you again next week. And please let your friends know that they can join the Gita membership at gitacomesalive.com. And you can get Nilesh's books at Amazon or subupublications.com. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Namaste and good night.